We got Marc Montoya on Fitz Nation, respected MMA coach. He's an OG of the fight game, runs Factory X Muay Thai up in Denver. Coach, how's it going, man?
I'm great, man. It's great to see you.
Um,
Thank you for having me
it's
on.
always good to chat with you, whether it's in a hotel hallway in Kansas City, like I ran into you in April, or in a form like this. Um, you're just the guy I need to talk to today, Mark.
Uh-oh.
I feel like I need a little, I feel like you provide great leadership for your team. That's why fighters like to go to Factory X. They try it out and they tend to stay because I feel like you're just one of those good life coach guys in addition to knowing how to fight. How do you describe that role for you?
Well, I learned early on just from coaching. I started coaching full time in 2008. And so I learned early on that this is way more than just the punches and kicks and chokes, and to be honest, that's the easy part of the job. The real meat and potatoes of the job is the mentoring and just, being the orchestrator of this big circus that we have,
Yeah.
and so um, and life always throws you curveballs constantly, and these guys didn't become fighters because life was easy, and so they come from pretty tough mixed backgrounds, and so did I. So we get a general bond when that happens, partly because I've walked in their shoes for a long
Yeah.
time and still do. And so the I always tell people when they first come here or we first meet and talk about training here is that in this order, I say this all the time, I've said this many times, is that my job is to help them become world champions first in life and then next in the cage. If those two don't intersect, and then it's a very peak and valley ordeal.
Yeah.
I mean, whether it's in the life or in the cage, sometimes they can be a shit show in life and still win in the cage. So I'm not saying that that's not true. However, the consistency of that you will see over time valley out because life is just a disaster, or vice versa. And so, knowing that as a person, knowing that growing up in that type of atmosphere and environment, and then being a coach for as long as I have, I just have put a lot of emphasis on that, and it's bode really well for us and our success.
Yeah. When what was the experience where you found, like you said, the punches and the kicks and the chokes is the easy part? What was the experience for you that let you know early on in your coaching career that there's more to it and that you're going to have to fulfill quite a more robust role in these fighters' lives?
I think the experience ultimately is just moving in, getting to know people. Once you start to get to know, when I was a brand new coach, just the team was way smaller, so the intimacy of getting to know these individuals, you start to find there's common themes here. And the funny part is, excuse me, the funny part is those common themes are some of the stuff that I've dealt with in life as well. Whether it's having troubled family issues, having the lack of guidance or leadership as you grow up, being bullied, like those are all kind of common themes that I see when I talk to fighters. And so I would say the first initial process was just moving in and getting to learn who these people were. And then as you start to talk to more of them, the team grows. That theme really doesn't change. It's a very similar theme.
Yeah.
Now, do they all come from a tough background? No, that's not true. I mean, there's kids that were raised in suburbia and they fight and they're great fighters, and that. But that's kind of those are the outliers when it, at least from my
Mhm.
experience of the people I've dealt with, and so the initial part was just moving in and getting to know these guys more than just holding mitts or grappling with them or wrestling with them or sparring or whatever. And so getting the opportunity to really get to know them, know their story, that's where I was like, okay, there's a lot more to this than us just.
Yeah. Football coaches particularly will go by that saying, like when they're recruiting, and college football coaches will say, um, the players don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. Have you found that like once you invested in their lives, what has been the effect with your team and like with their abilities?
Well, it always increases. I mean, that's the easy answer is that it gets better and it increases. But it's hard because you need time to do that.
Yes.
That's one of the things that's the hard part is you could care right off the bat, but if you don't get enough time to invest and show that you're making deposits in that care category, they know you care, I guess, but they don't know at what level. And then on top of that, they're gonna, there's gonna be some ebbs and flows of life and fighting and all these things. And but when the care stays constant and the relationship grows and flourishes like that, a coach athlete relationship is no different than a marriage, to be honest with you. Um, I've learned how to have a really good relationship with 30 different people, including my wife. And that's tough. It's not an easy job. That job is hard because every day is different. And, everyone's at a different stage of their life. I guess one of the things that becomes a little bit more navigable is my experience in life, as I continue to gain and grow my own experiences, good and bad. Those things then can be lent and shown in via not words. I mean, words have to be said,
Mhm.
but it's got to be action. And so I think that's why I say time, because these guys and gals need to see over time that what you say is really what you do. And I say all the time, how we do one thing is how we do all things. And so that's what I essentially what I'm getting down to is that is the meat and potatoes of it. But you need time for it to marinate and for them to see. And then, like if you have a really good handful of friends from life, they're probably not your great friends until you've had some time behind you to say, man, we've gone through the thick and thin of this thing. And over time, regardless of good or bad, this situationally we've stayed intact and grown.
Mhm.
And so I think growth is part of it too, is the growth part. It can't just be time and no growth. There has to be some growth, but with growth equals failure and all these things. And so that that is the hard part of the whole thing.
Yeah. What I when I said off the top that you're the person I need to talk to today is because I live a great life. I have a lot to be grateful for, as most of us do. But my son, who's one, woke up early this morning and it got me all off track. Right, I'm dealing with the bad sleep and the baby's fussing, whatever. And then I was just like, I'm talking to Marc Montoya today, and he was diagnosed with cancer. Right, and you've
Yep. Yep.
it's come out on the other side. And I just said, I imagine that just shakes you to your core in such a different way. Do you care if we talk about this, coach? Is it okay if we talk about it?
No, no,
So what was it?
yeah,
It was kidney
I'd love
cancer,
to.
and you were diagnosed when, late last year, like November last year or something?
Yeah, I was diagnosed with kidney cancer in November, and then right before Christmas, I had my kidney removed, my right kidney removed, and the cancer.
Yeah.
It was localized to the kidney, thank God. And the story of it's pretty wild how they found it because it wasn't like I had any symptoms
Right.
of anything, and so. But yeah, that's when all that happened for
They were
sure, and
looking at
it's
something else, right? You were going in for something else, and they found that.
Yeah, so I in all the years I've trained on the mat, I've never had a staph infection one time, and so um, I I got a staph infection in September, and I was actually getting ready to go bow hunting in to go bow hunt grizzly bear in Alaska, and so I was actually shooting my bow, getting ready, just making sure everything was dialed in. And I got stung by a bee in my right thigh, and I didn't think anything of it. That was a Sunday. I went back to practice on Monday, grappled and sparred and did all the stuff we do here. And then in a few days, my leg started swelling up. Well, long story short, I ended up going to Alaska hunting bear and this whole thing, but I was fighting a staph infection. I was on antibiotics. When I came back, it seemed to be getting better. And then it resurfaced after that and it got incredibly worse. And I was at the point where I was here on a Friday actually at our sparring sessions. And I've never sit down ever. And I was sitting down and I was coaching from the cage. And I was just in major pain. And so when I went into the hospital, my wife's like, "Yo, you're going to the hospital today," and I'm like, "I don't know." And she's like, "You're in terrible shape." So we go to the hospital. At the hospital, they say to me, "Listen, you're staying overnight. This is pretty serious. You've come in to the hospital with the start of kidney failure." And I was like, "What? What are you talking about?" Just a dehydration and fighting a staph infection for over a month, and all these things was leading to that and causing that. And so when we went in there, they said, "Hey, we're going to just do an ultrasound of your kidneys just to make sure, because you are in the beginning stages of some kidney failure." And I said, "Okay." They did that. They ended up doing surgery because they had to wash out my leg with the staph. That's how bad it was. My leg was twice the size of what it
Ooh.
was. At the end of the day, what happened is, from the ultrasound, when I came in there in my right kidney, they found what looked like a cancerous mass.
Mm.
And it was measuring 4.5 centimeters, which is about 2.5 inches. And they said, "Hey, this thing usually progresses a half to 0.75 centimeters a year. So that thing's been growing for a good 4-ish to 5 years."
Wow.
And right. And I was like, wow, that they said, "Have you had any
Mark,
symptoms?" And we went through the whole
I
thing.
want to get to the story, but can you take me to when they say the C word to you
Yeah, yeah,
and what
yeah.
you think?
So they tell me, so they tell me right after this, they say, "Hey, it looks to be cancer." And I was like, "It looks to be? What does that mean?" And so they said, when you have a cancerous mass like that, if there's blood flow to that, most of the time that's cancer. And when it's just a, non-cancerous mass, there's not blood flow. And so, that to be honest with you, Brendan, when I found out I actually had cancer was after they removed my kidney, because they can't tell.
They do
And
biopsy
um,
after.
they were pretty sure.
Yeah.
They were like, "Hey, we're pretty sure, we've done this a long time. It definitely appears to be cancer." But so, you always have that hope of maybe this is benign, maybe it's not. And then I remember after the surgery of getting my kidney removed, they make a big incision on your below your belly button and above it, and that's how they remove them now. They don't remove them out of your side
Mhm.
anymore. And so I just remember I was looking at my incision I was on. I hate the medication, and I just remember the doc calling me, and I was kind of half out of it.
Yeah.
And he said, "Hey, I'm just calling you to follow up to let you know we did the biopsy on the tumor in your kidney, and it's absolutely cancer." And so I just kind of sat there in silence. And, when I wasn't saying anything, so he was filling the void. And one of the things he said that resonated with me is, he said, "If we didn't catch this inside of another 2 years, we would have been having a conversation that this thing is terminal and you have 16 months to live, because once it metastasizes in the kidney, it's game over. Because kidney cancer doesn't respond to chemo or radiation,
Yeah.
and then it would have. And so the bottom line is, the bee was the messenger, and the bee sting was the messenger. The bee was the messenger, and ultimately, that staph infection and that bee sting saved my life. I mean, if you really think about it
Yeah.
in that context, that's true. So, but what it felt like, I'll tell you what it felt like. Um, it felt scary, but the other thing that I've said many times when I've been asked about this is, I felt an overwhelming peace too, because I felt like I'm not perfect, but I felt like I've really tried to give everything I could give. And whether it's as a husband or a father or a friend or a coach. And I was like, man, if cancer's taken me, I feel like I have peace with this. I wasn't scared, really. I didn't have a scared feeling. I had more of a peace feeling, like, okay. But I also had a feeling of, they got the cancer out, and God's got more plans for me to be here. This is why this is happening. And so I must be here to continue to do some good things. And so there was just peace. To be honest, it's
Yeah.
kind of weird.
Yeah. I mean, it is a unique thing where most people, they probably get diagnosed and then it's like, here's what we can do. But for you, they were like, let's get this kidney out of here. Is that what
Correct.
that's kind of
And
what the route of treatment was for you?
yes, and you can obviously survive on one kidney, and the fascinating thing is the existing kidney doubles in size and takes over for the one that's gone.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's pretty wild what the body
Right.
does. But um, it does give you sense of purpose. It also gives you don't take things for granted, and that stuff's really important. It's cliche because you hear this said all the time, and you take one day at a time. You have all these cliches about that stuff. But when you're in that position, you're diagnosed with that kind of stuff. That stuff's real. It's
Yeah.
true. I mean, and you know what I noticed, which was interesting, is when people found out what I was diagnosed with, whether it was pre-cancer or pre-surgery or post-surgery, I just noticed people were like, when they would hug me, because I'm an affectionate guy, I'm Hispanic, I come from a Hispanic family, we hug and kiss everybody. So I hug and, kiss everybody. And when they would hug me, I noticed they'd hug me longer. They would hold me longer. And I could tell, and I was like, wow. And you could just feel the care, the care. Or pre getting surgery, you could feel like he may not be here feeling, and so um, it's interesting to feel that. It's because we all have a life expectancy. It's just you're not expecting for that to happen when you're 48 years old. So um, it was a cool thing, but it was also it was
Yeah.
also something I noticed. I was like, wow, that's interesting.
Well, I was gonna ask you how old you are. So 48. I knew you were in your 40s. And like you're 48-year-old guy, you're a healthy guy. You're like a robust guy. You're not like my, you know, I don't want to say physical prime, but at the same time, like I feel like you participate with your team. You don't just call
Yes, I
the
train
shots from
constantly.
the sidelines, right?
Right.
What was that like for you to deal with the realization of like things can go wrong, even though I am much healthier than most people at my age?
It's very humbling. It's humbling. I've always felt like I, um, almost superhuman feeling. Like,
Hmm.
I've trained my whole life. I still train with my team. I train with, and I get on the mat. Like, that's just one of my styles of coaching is to get on the mat and train with them. I don't just draw the X's and O's, and nothing against coaches that do that. It's just not my style. And so um, to feel mortal was a very weird thing, especially in the industry that I'm in. It's very obviously alpha, and also there's an immortal feeling there, sort of. And so to feel mortal felt weak. Um, Felt very humbling, and I was like, man, this is this is not who I am, type thing, but it is. And so, how do we do this? And I just remember I was home, and the worst part was not the surgery. The worst part was the 6 to 7 weeks of not being able to sleep in my bed, and sleeping 2 hours a day, at a time, and then being up in the middle of the night and trying to do that and sleeping on its recliner. And it's always the post surgery stuff that's really tough. I
Hmm.
couldn't be on the painkillers because I hate that stuff. And so, I was working just on Tylenol, and so the pain was intense. The pain from the whole thing was very intense. And
Hmm.
so, um, yeah, it was it made me feel very mortal. And
Yeah.
when I came back in here, it was less than 2 weeks. I came into the gym, and I wasn't training per se, but I was here
Yeah.
talking shit, and but at the end of the day, it wasn't. I just didn't feel like myself, and I started thinking like, man, I may have to coach in a different way
Mhm.
because. But I also was like, nah, there's no way. I'll be back. There's no way this is stopping me from how I know how to do these things. And so, and it hasn't. It was temporary, but I feel immortal again.
Yeah, right.
But no, but in all seriousness, it's a very humbling thing. It's
Right.
for everybody. The thing I've said a lot is um, I scared a lot of people with this, but I personally wasn't scared, and I don't mean that in a tough guy way. I just mean that in a peace way. God gave me a lot of peace with it, I guess, is one of the blessings I feel like I've had with it. And I'm very grateful for that. But I did scare a lot of people around me,
Well, it seems like it would be one of those things kinda like, imagine you know this quite a bit as a coach, is like, if Dustin Jacoby's going in there, and now I don't think you're nervous about it, but at the same time, Dustin Jacoby's circle is more nervous about him getting in the fight than Dustin is. He's
for
going
sure.
in there
Yeah.
and he's just like, "I'm gonna win, I'm gonna lose, I'm gonna give it my best effort, and that's that." I feel like that might be kind of a similar thing, no? Where, like, you're diagnosed with a thing, it's the focus is on you and everybody else because they can't do anything about it, um, they just have to ride the wave of emotions, whereas to you, it's happening to you, and you just have to come to terms with it somehow.
No, I think your analogy is perfect. I mean, I deal with it as a coach constantly, where I'm not the one in the cage.
Right.
Uh, all the control I had is done. I mean, we trained you up to go win a fight, and now it's like, okay, go win the fight, buddy. And so, yeah, no, I think your analogy is perfect. I think that's spot on. I actually haven't even thought about it that way. Personally
Mhm.
in that fight. But the support I've had around me is incredible. I mean, it's been awesome. Whether it's from the MMA community, my team, my family, my friends, people I didn't know. It's been amazing, and that part is very humbling too, in a good way. Like it's like, wow, that's really cool to see that there's genuine care on people's face when they're like, man, you okay?
Mhm.
And they know me, when I say I am, they know I'm probably hiding some shit, but that I'm gonna be fine. And
Yeah.
so,
Yeah.
um, yeah, that you're spot on with that.
Yeah. How did the experience, that you went through change what you do now or how you think now?
Well, I think I feel like I've always tried to be grateful for what I've got. I came from nothing as a kid. I mean, my parents were 16 and 17 when they had me. We grew up on welfare. I have that story. So I grew up in the hood right here in Denver. That's my story. And so I've always been grateful because of my background. But I think gratitude is something that has really resonated with me. Fear is a liar is another thing I can tell you that is absolutely true. The fear of what you're feeling is a feeling, but what are the facts of this thing? And so I've really been able to tap into that and just find a lot of gratitude around what I'm doing. When you get a kidney out, one of the things the doctors say to you is that you're going to have some hormonal changes. When I think of hormones, I think of women. I'm like, hormones? What are you talking about?
Yeah.
But because I was on the highest grade of antibiotics you could be on from an IV drip in both arms for multiple days, and then oral antibiotics, the highest grade you could have, it like killed my gut biome. And as you know, if you know anything about your gut biome, that's where a lot of things are stored: your mood, your energy, your cravings, your all these things. And so between my gut biome getting just murdered by antibiotics, my kidney coming out, and quote unquote your hormones are going to change, I felt that too. I felt there has been absolutely an aftermath of, I wouldn't say depression, but uh, like a rebuild, like a reboot. Like you don't have the whole system running yet. And I still feel that present day. And my surgery was basically 5 months ago. We're at the beginning of
Mhm.
June. So, you know, um, it hasn't, the body hasn't fully reboot, and the mind hasn't totally caught up with that either. And so there is some days where I just feel a little off. I'm like, man, I feel a little off. And so that also builds gratitude because you appreciate when your system's at 100 and it's
Yeah.
clicking,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
I hide it a lot. Like I get on the mat and one of my superpowers is I feel like I have multiple gears that I could constantly tap into. There are days when I'm done now, man, and I'm like, for the day, and I'm like, wow, I am so whooped from today,
Right, right,
and rightly so. Like all the stuff that we do is tough and rigorous, and I'm not a spring chicken anymore. But
right.
it wasn't like that 5 months ago. At least it didn't feel that way. And so that builds gratitude too on that negative front.
Yeah. Do you find, Mark, that like I don't know, I always viewed when people would talk about mental health, I would almost view it as like I would acknowledge the issue. Like I would acknowledge that other people have those issues, and then I was grateful that I don't have those issues. And then I think it's just we all do. It just takes a varying amount of time to get to them. So now I'm just like, maybe it's because I'm juggling more. Like I've never been as successful as I am, but I've also never juggled more in terms of work. And then also throw in 2 kids and then all these other things. And it's not like I'm stressed about like the survival mode, right? Like making the next payment. And there are people that are that. So
Sure.
maybe that's why their mental health things may pop up earlier than it has for me. But it is there, and it's just like it's almost like in varying degrees of how it's going to arrive to you and when it's going to arrive to you. And it's almost like, whereas the old fashioned way would be like mental health as a term is for people that are soft, and now it's almost just like I can acknowledge it a bit more, and just it doesn't mean this clinical thing, it just means how you're handling what life is thrown at you.
Excuse me. Yeah, I would say all that stuff's a decision. Um, it's there's absolutely quantifiable quantifiable evidence that that exists. The decision that I'm talking about is, do you stay in that zone with said thing? It's not that we're not going to go through some of that stuff. It's just, are you going to decide to stay in that zone, or are we going to fight out of the zone? And so, um, easier said than done for sure. And people have dealt with way worse stuff than what we're talking about. I've dealt with, and so, um, but being told you have cancer is never a fun thing, especially when you're young and healthy, uh, or even if you weren't. No one wants to hear that, but it doesn't. I, I pick if I stay in that zone. Some days are better than others, but I got to recognize, like, yo, that's the red flag waving. Like, you're getting in that zone, bro. Like, that's you get out of that, and that's where I think the fight comes in. Is that,
Mhm.
um, and I'm a fighter at heart, so that's one of my ways to combat everything, whether
Yeah.
it's fighting with your fists or fighting with your mind or whatever's going on, your will. But I do feel like the decision has to be made constantly, when you have those constant fights of where you're at mentally, whether it's a diagnosed illness or it's your mood that day, or you had a bad moment. Are you going to let the moment ruin your day? Because honestly, someone says you had a bad day. I don't think you had a bad day. I think you had a bad 10 minutes. I think you had a bad hour. I think you had a bad 30 seconds. Are we going to let that moment ruin the whole day? And sometimes we do. I've done it where I'm like, man, I let that whole moment ruin my day today. And so I think that being aware and having the presence of, no, 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 no. That's a moment. I'm pissed for a moment. Now it's time to shift and make some adjustments is the hardest part of it. But I believe ultimately that's the decision, and then the recognition with tools to know, okay, that's a moment. That's not a bad day, because a bad day was a decision.
Yeah. That's why I told you, coach, I needed to talk to you today. For all these
Right.
reasons.
Right.
So, what do you find yourself passing on to your team now because of going through the cancer and the surgery and the aftermath that you're still dealing with? What do you impart on your team now that's a message that wasn't before?
Well, I think resiliency. I think that they see that I don't just talk the shit, that I'll actually walk through it with them. They knew that before this. They definitely know it now. Um, they know that one of my passions is this place, is them. And It's my family for sure. But my MMA family, the kids that I train and coach and go to battle with on a weekly basis, um, I think they've just found from that example. It's not if there's that quote that says, your actions speak so loudly, I can't hear what you're saying. I think it's that. And so I think they always knew that too. And I always tell people, I'm not the coach for everybody. I
Mhm.
learned this in time. Like, I'm not the coach for everybody. So there's great fighters out there that I don't coach, right? But I am the coach for some people, and that's part of the reason why is because they resonate with that, and they resonated with it before I had cancer, and they've seen the passion that I have now, and so I feel like the resiliency they've seen is constant regardless of the situation, and they take that into life, which is goes back to what we talked about at the very beginning.
Mhm.
How do you become a world champion in life? Well, you get tools to become a world champion, and then you use tools, and you constantly lean on tools, and you're going to fail, but it doesn't mean that you've lost the war. You've just lost a battle or a moment or however
Mhm.
you want to look at it. And so you need tools to do that. And, we constantly give the team tools. I mean, whether it's we as a team read a book a month together as a team, and sometimes they're fun books, sometimes they're not. Sometimes they're books of about growing your mind and your body and your spirit and your faith and all these things. The point is, those are tools. That's a tool, just like how we'd show you to throw a jab or attack a guillotine or whatever. And so, the more tools you have in your toolbox, the more resilient you can be, and the recognition of a moment rather than a whole shitty day is important because you got tools in the toolbox.
Yeah.
And that's what I think ultimately is found is that, and I don't do it perfectly either. Sometimes I mess that up and they watch me, and I tell them all the time, why are you going to live to 48 to figure out what I know if you'll listen for 15 minutes and figure it out when you're 20? You know what I mean?
Exactly. Exactly.
If you want to wait till you're 48, go ahead. Then you'll
Yeah.
you'll be bald and have gray in your beard like me. Um,
Exactly.
but the point is that, and that's cool because they get that experience upon them, and they see that I'm not perfect either, and that I have flaws, and that I actually screw stuff up too. But
Yeah.
I'm not going to quit because of that, and I'm not going to stop caring either. And so um, that is a thing that is the theme, I should say, that constantly resonates, and that's why I have such a close knit team, and that's why the kids I train, it's rare that they leave, and when they do, fair enough, I wasn't the right fit anymore. And so,
Yeah.
but the kids I've trained a lot of kids since they were teenagers that are now in their late 20s or 30, early 30s, and still fighting. And Brandon Royval is a good example. That kid used to ride his bicycle to practice, and now he's getting ready to become a world champion at 125 pounds. So
Yeah.
he's a great example of that. And
Yeah.
Yusuf Zalal is another teenager. Like those are kids that. So anyway, that I think that's ultimately one of the things that is learned.
Yeah. Um, yeah, the magic is anybody can learn from what happens to them. The magic is when you can learn from what other people go through so that you don't have to go through that, right? It's
Right?
that
Yeah,
I mean
exactly.
it's tough too, and it's the tougher part. Last question, coach. Do you have a neat little bullet point list when you say before you can become a world champion in the octagon or in the cage? Um, do you have a neat little list when you say you got to become a world champion in life? What's the
Yes,
factors?
and I think it, and I know that it goes hand in hand on both ends.
Mhm.
So if you're watching this and you're not a MMA fighter, it would go into business, and then it would go into life or
Mhm.
whatever you're spending your time doing. One of the biggest things is consistency. Consistency is tough. Consistency is tough because consistency doesn't always give you the reward immediately. It's like when you invest money, you need compound interest, and that compound interest is because you consistently invested that $100 a month for 20 years. and it compounded and grew. So consistency is a big theme. Um, Sacrifice is another one. Consistency and vast sacrifice, they kind of go hand in hand. Like you have to sacrifice things that are important to you to be able to be consistent, to be able to go achieve. And so, your sacrifice is a big deal, because who wants to do that? I don't want to sacrifice anything. But I feel like constantly you have to sacrifice things to go achieve and be consistent. And so, your consistency, your sacrifice, and then the last thing I always say is your commitment. Um, Commitment is big, because you can have a goal, and if you don't have consistency, you don't have sacrifice, then the commitment is lost. And so, what's the commitment? The commitment is, I'm going to lose 10 pounds this year. It's fun to say January 1st. What about right now in June? June's the meat and potatoes of the commitment, because June's when you want to quit. It's not fun anymore. No one's talking about it anymore. The ads are gone. People aren't asking you. It's what you're doing when no one's watching is the commitment piece. And so, the commitment is tough, because commitment can be boring too. So can consistency. So can sacrifice.
Most
Those
of the time,
things,
it is boring.
it's all boring. Like, how fun is it to go invest $100 a month for 20 years? It's boring. It's boring. Why not take $2,000 and try to turn that profit overnight? It
Yeah.
could happen.
I
The
live
risk
in the city
reward
for
is
that,
high.
Mark. Come on down.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. No,
That's my point.
the glitz and the glamour is
Yes.
the exciting. The
It's exciting.
success is the boring.
Yes. And
And that's
I
what it
always
takes.
I always laugh when people are like, "Man, that person's an overnight success." It's crazy. I'm like, that's crazy talk. I know
Yes.
it's a cliche, but the point is that it took consistency, sacrifice, and commitment every day, boring on the boring end of the spectrum, to do that. Are there some flares and flashes inside of all that? Yeah, because you're making leaps and bounds. You're finding progress. You're finding some failure. There are the flashes of fun, and not just a old boring $100 a month thing. But the thing is that it dissipates, because I think when we talk about all this, one of the things we're always after is not happiness, because I always quantify happiness as, you tell me a joke and it's funny, and then it's gone, and it's like, okay, that was funny, and then it's done. That's happiness to me. Like, if I was quantifying that. Joy, though, is different. Joy is eternal. Joy is long term. And honestly, where you get most joy is from giving to others. And so when you have consistency, you have commitment, you have sacrifice, you're not only giving to yourself, but along that trail and pathway, you've had to go and give to others in order to do that stuff and experience all that. There's no way that you can have commitment, consistency, and sacrifice without giving back to others and doing that. And that's where you're finding some internal joy. So yeah, the boring $100 a month pays off when you're 48 and you look at your portfolio and you've been doing it since you were 23, and you're like, man, 25 years of that looks pretty nice.
Yes.
I've experienced some joy now.
Yeah. You push that.
And so,
Yeah. Push that boulder to the top of the hill. Once
yes,
it gets to the other side, you can just ride it down.
and honestly, people don't want to hear that though, because they think there's a secret recipe. There's really no secret recipe. You have to have drive and will and want, and you got to have toughness, and you got to have resiliency, and you got to have all these things for sure. However, that is the secret sauce. Sorry, it's boring, but that's the secret sauce. Like, how long are you willing to do it? How many times do people celebrate when people have been married for 50 years?
Right.
People are astounded. They're like, "That's amazing." It's what an accomplishment. Well, it wasn't all a Gatorade commercial for 50 years. It
Right.
was a lot of consistency, commitment, and vast sacrifice. But that's an ultimate success. I mean, Those are successes that were found over time from that daily. And
Yeah.
so if you ask me to quantify it, that's how I quantify
Well, coach, it was great talking to you. It was just what I needed today.
it.
It's just what the doctor ordered.
My man, I love it.
And I'm always happy to see you, whether brief or longer, and hope to cross paths with you in person again soon. But I'm forever a fan of you and your team and everything that you've built up there.
Thank you, man. I appreciate that. It's always humbling and honored to hear, people say that, especially you. You know, before we go, I just want to say, you've done an incredible job with your career. Just the advancement of where you sit right now, and what you've done, and how polished you've become. And I remember when you were just up and coming doing this thing.
Yeah.
I am dating myself somewhat because I've been around for a long time. But the point is, though, is that I've seen your growth from the genesis of this thing to where it is today. And man, I'm proud of you, bro. You're killing it, and keep doing that, because it's not easy to do what you're doing, and you are the definition of what we just talked about. So you should smile and pat yourself on the back, because I'm a big fan and proud of your work.
Thanks for saying that, coach. Really appreciate it.
It's my pleasure.